Well, good morning and welcome. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jeremiah Aha. I'm the Assistant Director here with Wellness Together School Mental Health. I'm part of a great team, and we're so glad that you took time out of your busy day to join us. And we're excited, especially to partner with the Education Trust West, as well as the California Department of Education. Grateful to partner with CDE and for Monica Nepomuceno and her commitment to student mental health as she leads the Student Mental Health Policy Work Group, a great group of individuals that are advocates and champions for our students all across the state. We had the privilege of meeting with the Education Trust and the Education Trust West team at last year's California Student Mental Wellness Conference in Sacramento. I had a chance to meet Alicia, the executive director, and began conversations with them, and really have admired the work they are doing to advocate for students as well here. And so we are privileged to partner with them as well. And you're going to get a chance to hear a little bit more about the work that they are doing here out of their office in Oakland. Also, just want to let everyone know as we kick things off that there's going to be some time at the end of the webinar for question and response. So feel free to chat in your questions and submit those. If you have questions about the work or any questions about the presentation that they will be giving, feel free just to submit those in the chat box. And we have a couple members here of our team here in our office today that is monitoring that, and they'll curate the questions for us. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Marlon Morgan, our executive director here for Wellness Together School Mental Health. He has a few words of introduction before we begin this morning. I'll introduce both Alicia and Maida, and then we'll begin. Again, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, good morning. Thank you to Jeremiah and the rest of the Wellness Together team that's helped us put on this webinar. Thank you to you all, participants and school counselors and school mental health specialists, administrators throughout the state and the rest of the country who have joined us today. I want to thank Monica Nepomuceno at the CDE for her work over the past 12 years in the Student Mental Health Policy Work Group. She has been an amazing advocate for pushing forward the issue to further and move the needle when it comes to our students' mental health in California. I also want to thank Dr. Smith Arriaga and Dr. Lara for joining us today. When I began as a school counselor, it was obvious how important it was to get to know the students and families that I was serving. To develop strong connections with them meant that I could advocate and represent on their behalf. Now more than ever, school counselors are the ambassadors for equity and opportunity for our students. And this next hour is focused on giving you the tools and empowering you with additional resources and interventions to continue to champion our students and families at your site.
Okay, our presenters for this morning from the Education Trust West. Up first is, as far as introductions, I'll introduce Maida Lara. She's a senior practice associate for the Education Trust West. She's a research and advocacy organization. That's what the Education Trust West is, based in Oakland. Maida joined Education Trust West with 10 years of classroom teaching experience in the Los Angeles Unified School District. While there at the district, she worked to create meaningful and lasting relationships with students. She served as department chair, union representative, and coach. She received her BA in English Literature and MA in Social and Cultural Analysis of Education from the California State University Long Beach, where she also taught courses as a lecturer in the College of Education. Maida also holds a doctorate in education from the Educational Leadership for Social Justice from Loyola Marymount University, where her research focused on Chicana feminist theory, critical pedagogy, and students' experiences as they navigated the sexual politics of education. Also joining us is the executive director for the Education Trust West. That is Dr. Alicia Smith Arriaga. Their organization and her work is focused on educational justice and supporting the high achievement of all California students, with a particular focus on underserved students of color, low-income students, and English learners. Dr. Smith Arriaga leads the organization's work centering education as a key racial and economic justice issue and has extensive expertise in leading initiatives using multiple strategies for impacting state policy. This includes leveraging direct action, research, media, and policymaker engagement. She has more than 20 years experience working in and partnering with education and workforce policy, research, and advocacy organizations, including the Career Ladders Project, First 5 LA, College Bound, the Hewlett Foundation, Mathematica Policy Research, and high schools and community colleges across the state of California. She holds a PhD in Public Affairs from Princeton, an MS in Survey Methodology from the University of Maryland at College Park, and a BA in Mathematics from Smith College. She is also the proud mother of a rising kindergartner. We're lucky to have them with us here both. And right now I'll turn it over to Dr. Smith Arriaga and Dr. Lara for their presentation, which is the School Counselor webinar, Increasing Equity and Opportunity for Our Students.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. This is Alicia Smith Arriaga, and I'm super excited to be here with
Mayra Lara.
And we are going to spend a few minutes talking with you today, both about the work that EdTrust West does across the state, and then really focusing on increasing equity and opportunity for your students. I'll just start out by saying we're beyond excited when Jeremiah reached out with this opportunity, because here at EdTrust West, we really believe that counselors are one of the most pivotal roles in ensuring equity for student success. And we also know, and we'll talk more about this, shortly, that counselors play such a big role, but there are also, just in terms of caseload, so many students that you're serving. And so, are just really privileged to be able to have a little bit of time with you today and to share some information we have and learn from you as well. So just a little bit about Education Trust West. We are the West Coast office of a national advocacy organization, the Education Trust. And the Education Trust is in Washington, D.C. It's headed by John King, who was Secretary of Education under President Obama. And our national office, as well as many of our state offices, we have offices in New York, in the Midwest, and then also have hubs in Massachusetts, Delaware, Washington State, Texas, North Carolina, soon to be Tennessee. But in each of those locations, our goal as an organization is really to focus on closing the opportunity gap, really through using research, data, and policy analysis. And what we mean by that is really trying to make sure that we put research and data in the hands of parents, teachers, students, communities, so that they are able to use that data and that research to advocate for the policy change that they want to see. So just to give you a sense of who we are in the California office, EdTrust West, although we're EdTrust West in name, we really serve California exclusively, and we are the largest regional office of the Education Trust. We have 3 locations. Our main office is here in Oakland, and we also have offices in Sacramento and in Los Angeles. The Los Angeles one was just launched this summer, which we're really excited about. And here you see some pictures of our very great team. We take a lot of pride in making sure, one, that our team is diverse and reflects the students, parents, and families of the state who are in the public education system, which are the families that we serve. And then the other thing that we think is really important is to have really deep expertise on our team of folks who have been former teachers, former counselors, former advocates themselves, grassroots organizers. And so those are the depths of experiences as well as researchers of the folks that you see pictured here. So how do we do our work? We really like to think about our theory of change as the ultimate goal being that policy changes have been implemented that, one, really reflect the outcomes the students, parents, teachers, and families in the state want to see, and that we are doing that really in partnership with folks across the state. So you see here in the beginning of the theory of change, really the ideas that we're working both with state policymakers as well as community groups across the state. And our role in that is to really be providing both tools, research, data to both the policymakers and to communities across the state, with the idea that that is really increasing political and public will to secure those policy changes and to make sure that they're implemented with the with equity. So here you see pictures of many of the reports and aligned presentations and direct advocacy actions that we have done in the past. One picture you see here is from the Black Minds Matter rally, where we had over 1,000 students at the state capitol. That was shortly after we published the Black Minds Matter report, which you see on the right, which really laid out a policy agenda to close the opportunity gap for Black students in the state. You also see here the majority report kind of behind this first report. And for us, the majority report, there was an email that went around the office last year after the majority report was released, and it had a picture of someone in the Central Valley holding up that report, a community member in their local school board meeting, and really demanding for some of the policy changes that are laid out in that report for Latino students across the state. And for us at Trust West, that's what success really looks like. Now, some of the policy change that we have worked on and have seen some progress on educational justice has been both in K-12 and in higher ed. We did a lot of work last year on the new funding formula that is being used to fund community colleges for the first time in many years in the state. We are increasing our focus in the coming months on improving the retention and recruiting of teachers of color, as well as bilingual teachers. And then we've also done a lot of work on the past in terms of protecting undocumented students and families. We have a fact sheet that has been used by many districts across the state as well. Now, in all of this, one of the things, as I said earlier, that we think is most important, and as you know every day in the work that you do, is the critical role that school counselors play in ensuring that students have access to opportunities at school that are safe, that are enriching, and that are helping prepare them for reaching their biggest goals and desires in life. But the other thing that we know as an organization, and we know you're all too familiar with, is that there are not enough school counselors in the U.S. You see here on this slide the ratios for counselors to students in all schools, and then especially in high schools, and we know those numbers are much too high. We also know that we narrow down to not just the whole country, but look at what's going on here, that our ratios here are even higher than those across the country. And we know that that doesn't set us up for a state to really be able to deeply work with students in the way that we know everyone would really like to. But we also know that there are folks who are doing great work across the state and who are using tools to really try and make a change and make sure that every student has equitable access to the opportunities that they need to succeed. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lara now to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Alicia. And I just realized that we did not include the link in this slide, but there are resources that you can access and that I will be referencing that are in a Google folder, and you can access that through a bit.ly site, and it's bit.ly/school counselor webinar if you'd like to access any of those resources that I am going to speak about, and that information will also be forthcoming. So one of the things that we also do with Trust West is that we often partner with school districts across the state to conduct educational equity audits. These are research studies that include understanding the experiences of different stakeholders to help districts make some changes in practice and in policy to increase equitable educational experiences for students. Here is some of what we hear from counselors across the state. We hear that they experience communication challenges with parents and emergent bilingual students, and this is often because of language barriers that exist and also because of time. We also hear that they experience lack of time to meet with all students, especially those who might be struggling academically due to large caseloads. And we also hear from counselors that there is an increased need for more social emotional learning counseling resources that they would like to have access to be able to give families and students access to these resources as well. And in case you're interested, you can read more about our equity audit in the document titled ETW Menu of Services in the folder, the Google folder that I mentioned. As part of our work at Trust West, we also conduct research studies to help elevate some of the promising practices from educators across the state. We strongly believe, like Alicia said, that the expertise lives within the folks who do this work on a daily basis, and think it important that these are shared widely. One of the promising practices we learned about comes from Monrovia Unified School District in Southern California, and what they do that is incredibly promising for both counselors, students, and families as well is that they implemented summer student and parent counseling appointments. With the help of site-based administrators, counselors are able to schedule 20-minute summer appointments with students and with their families. Counselors use the individual 20-minute meetings to discuss students' social and academic progress and design a plan for the upcoming school year. So how do they make that happen? What Monrovia Unified School District did is that they developed a new position, a Director of Counseling, College, and Careers. In this role, Dr. Catherine Real, along with counselors, was able to successfully advocate to have supplemental funds allocated so school-based academic counselors could return to work 2 weeks prior to the beginning of the school year. During these 2 weeks, counselors are able to conduct the appointments, and they are also compensated for their time. Through this practice, Monrovia Unified School District is ensuring that students and families are supported and have a more personalized relationships with their counselors. When they surveyed families, the majority, 87% of families at Monrovia High School reported finding these meetings very useful. Additionally, 96% of families shared that the individual appointments improved their involvement in their students' academic planning decisions. Because this happened the summer before, families already felt like they were invited, they were part of their students' academic conversations about their academic progress, and they were more open and willing to continue the conversations throughout the school year. So when we think about what Monrovia did, it's important to also think about how this could work in different contexts. And when you think about implementing this practice in your district or in your school, we recommend that first you know your context. We understand that at Monrovia Unified, 20 minutes was feasible, and it was something that they were able to do. But perhaps in your context, 20 minutes are not possible. It might not be possible to do 20-minute appointments. So perhaps consider a different time frame that is adequate for your site, for staff, for students, and for families, and also an adequate time frame. Perhaps it's not 2 weeks before the school year, perhaps it's a shorter amount of time. It's important to know what would work best for your context. Another recommendation is that you might want to consider starting with ninth grade students. Sometimes having a more manageable starting point helps bring colleagues along and helps folks know that it might be a pilot and to see how it works with a smaller group of students. Another recommendation is that you might want to consider engaging your feeder schools. Perhaps they can provide a list of students whom they recommend prioritizing, and perhaps that's how you can also bring colleagues along and start with a more manageable load. If you'd like to read more information about this promising practice, it can be found in the document titled CCR Action Guide Counselors. Through our equity audits, we find that counselors are also largely left out of opportunities to collaborate with colleagues and meaningfully participate in professional learning communities. Our statewide promising practice research showed that integrating counselors and really all school site personnel into existing professional learning communities and or creating counselor exclusive PLCs can be beneficial for students, it can be beneficial for staff, and also can be really beneficial for families as well. Having your own PLC as counselors can help to increase collaboration, and it also helps create a culture where all novice and experts learn from one another about how to best work with students, their families, and with colleagues. And this is something that we heard repeatedly through our promising practice research. But also, including counselors in pre-existing PLCs is beneficial because it provides an opportunity to collaborate with staff during structured time. It provides additional opportunity to communicate with teachers about students and families, and it is beneficial to the larger community. Counselors are the only group that has dedicated one-on-one time with students. There's a lot others can learn from your experience, from your expertise, and from your recommendations. So it's important to ensure that counselors are included in that structured collaboration time. To make this happen, we recognize that administrators must be on board. To advocate for that, you could start with listening tours or focus groups. We recognize that speaking with folks and conducting listening tours where you get an opportunity to hear from different stakeholders might be time-consuming, but it is incredibly valuable because you can capture the voices of multiple stakeholders, and the collective voice of a lot of folks is often much more powerful for movement building than approaching the work alone. So having those voices can definitely help with the advocacy work. We have provided a tool to help you get started on listening tours in the document titled Listening Tours, Questions. Findings from the listening tours could help determine what meaningful inclusion in PLCs could look like in your setting, and it could also help advocate for the type of dedicated collaboration time that you and others at your school site would like to see happen. These listening tours could really help with capturing the collective voice as opposed to having to advocate by yourself. And it helps bring other folks along. If you tap into the expertise of the folks at your school sites who might be open and willing, not just to conduct the listening tours with you, but also to dig through some of the findings of those. The third promising practice we'd like to share with you is creating and fostering humanizing experiences for students. This is something that we really learned about through our promising practice, about the impact that it can make on young people, on the staff, and also on families. What this means is grappling with your own identities, your own biases, and your own privileges. We have to recognize that we all have them, and it is important that we understand them, including how they may manifest in our work with students and with colleagues. If we are to create an environment where every person's humanity is recognized and supported, it's important that we start with the self. So this also means allowing space for counter narratives. Yes, starting with the self is important, but it also is important to hear from students, creating space for them to share their stories about who they are and how they experience school, instead of creating our own assumptions about students and their families and about what they are able and capable of accomplishing. I think it's important that, and we heard that it's important to allow space for young people to tell their stories, because oftentimes the narratives that we create about students are deeply rooted in our own identities, in our own biases, and our own privileges. And it's important that instead of creating those, we hear from them. This also means acknowledging and identifying systemic racism and the ways that it may manifest in the policies and practices within your schools and within your districts. We recognize that this is often an uncomfortable process, but it is necessary if we are to dismantle oppressive policies and practices and make space for liberatory experiences. Some questions to consider are also included in a document that we have made available. So how do we do all of this? How do we start? We recommend that you engage in self-reflection and that you encourage your colleagues to do the same. Like I mentioned, we've developed a tool to help you get started. It's titled Humanizing Practices, Questions. This not only has questions to ask yourself and have your colleagues begin to ask themselves in self-reflection, but it also includes tools to start thinking about the system, how systemic racism plays out within schools and within districts. We also recommend you advocate your district and school leadership teams to seek outside partnerships. We know that often the burden of addressing some of these issues may fall on a handful of folks, and this can be taxing. Outside partners can help. The document titled CCR Action Guide Partnerships describes the many partnerships districts and schools across the state have and how they help. It is also, when thinking about addressing issues of identity, bias, privilege, systemic racism, and counter narratives, there is a lot of expertise in outside partnerships that you can start to create allies, right, with outside partners, so that the work doesn't seem so isolating, and that you also, folks who are doing this work, also have engaged some thought partnership, so that they know how and can receive additional tools for engaging in this kind of work. It's also important to take a strengths-based approach to your work with students, families, and colleagues. Again, focusing on the positive, on the assets that folks bring with them, and this is possible through counter-narratives. In examining the system, conducting a root cause analysis can be helpful to better understand how some policies and practices may be detrimental to students. Again, the tool that we have online can help start to examine the system.
So thanks, Mara, for sharing those 3 very promising practices. Before we close today and really open it up for questions, because we wanted to leave a lot of time to really be in dialogue with you, we wanted to close with just 2 things that we know impact all the pieces that we've talked about so far. And those are, when we've been in conversations across the state, fiscal adequacy and finances are often one of the things that come up when, folks say, these are great promising practices, but how do we ensure that our district or our county is receiving the funding that they need to be able to put some of these into practice? And so, as we open up this 2-way dialogue with you, what we have here on the screen are some questions to get us started in thinking about if finances are a concern. Are there short-term, for instance, funding sources that could be leveraged to make sure that some of these promising practices can be put into place? We also have some questions here around, not only at the state level, but at the county or district level, are there requirements for the number of school counselors per school or per student? And if so, how are those requirements being met? And if not, what are strategies to ensure that there are more counselors? We've been thinking with colleagues at our national office, both around this question and with counselors across the state, and would love to hear if there are strategies that you're aware of as well that we could be sharing with others. And then finally, the pipeline is also extremely important. As there are more and more high schools across the state, working with community colleges, for instance, and doing more dual enrollment, we know that many of those programs are really focusing on creating all kinds of pipeline programs in health, in science, in computer science. And one of the areas that we've started to hear more about as well are pipelines to train future teachers. It would be great to learn more about pipeline programs that are doing the same thing for school counselors. And if you're aware of those and how folks are thinking about those pipelines and starting early with students, as early as middle school or high school, really planting that seed around becoming a school counselor themselves, or making sure that the dual enrollment classes are in place, that's an opportunity for students in their districts. We also know that equity is another big question that comes up when folks look at promising practices. We've heard across the state questions around both the finance piece that I raised before and then equity. And ways to think about this and questions to be asking in your district if you have that same question are, what are some of the strategies for providing school counselors in some of the highest need schools? So how are we making sure that all schools have equitable access to counselors? And then also, what are the policies or procedures at the district or the county level in terms of allocating school counselors to which schools? And then also thinking through what the distribution is of school counselors and how that's either equitable or inequitable.
And just to note, the source at the bottom that's titled School Counselors Matter, a fact sheet by Trust West, Reach Higher, and American School Counselor Association, is also available in the Google folder that I spoke about earlier, so you can have a quick access to that document.
So before we jump into Q&A, we love to just, share our contact information. We're always looking to be in touch with folks who are in schools, working with students. And actually on this Thursday, we'll be bringing together over 500 individuals from schools and colleges across the state who are interested in learning more, not only about some of the topics we just talked about, but also the title of our conference is Accelerating Educational Justice, and folks from across the state will be sharing promising practices that they are finding are working in schools everywhere. And with that, we love to hear from you.
Dr. Lara and Dr. Smith-Arriaga, thank you both very much. We've had some great questions that have come through, and I'll begin with this first one, and that is, how does equity differ from equality in education?
So it's a great question, and I know folks have likely seen often that slide where there are 3 kids standing on boxes looking at a baseball game, and they're all different heights, and there is one definition of equity that says, hey, every student should have a box so that they can all see the field from the same vantage point. And at Trust West, the way that we think about, we hear in the field a lot of times these terms being confused of equity and equality, because equality is giving each student the same thing, and equity is giving students what they need, regardless of maybe one student needs more and another student needs a little less. And actually, if we were to think back to that graphic at Trust West, the definition that we really like to think about, if we're thinking of it in pictorial terms, is, that in that particular graphic, they're all standing on boxes, they're different heights, but because of the boxes, they can all see the field at an equal level. And in our minds, equity is really, they wouldn't even be standing outside the field, they'd be in the game. So what we mean by equity is that every person has the opportunity to achieve with equitable and are given the resources to do so. And that may mean some folks need few more resources and some folks need less resources.
That is great. Thank you. What I love about that is students are not to be just onlookers, but participants within something and excelling out on the field, figuratively speaking. That's great. Thank you. Next question. What role, if any, does PBIS play in ensuring equity for all students?
Yeah, PBIS is particularly important because through project-based learning, students have the opportunity to show mastery of state standards in different ways, right? I think one of the things that is particularly when we go out and we go to school districts and school sites and see young people engaging in project-based learning, pedagogical practices at their school sites, we see that they are able to leverage their strengths in whatever their academic and social strengths may be, and they can participate in the content and in the content standards in ways that are true to them. And this speaks true for emergent bilingual students as well, for young people who might not have completely mastered the English language yet, but they can still participate in ways that are authentic and that they can show mastery of the content in various ways. So I think that when we think about PBIS, it really does open students opportunities to engage with content in equitable ways. And one of the things that we do note, though, is that it's important for continuous professional learning opportunities for adults on campus, not just teachers, but counselors as well, in order to ensure that the work is happening. May I ask a clarifying question? I was saying PBIS, and I realized I was responding about PBL. Is that correct?
I was going to wait until there was an appropriate pause. Thank you. We are for that. I think that was a tremendous answer. But yeah, PBIS, positive behavior intervention and supports on campus.
Yes, I just realized when I said PBIS that I was talking about PBL. My sincerest apologies.
Not a problem, not a problem. But yes, what role does that play in ensuring equity for all students?
Yeah, PBIS plays a strong role. In fact, one of the resources that I shared, the CCR document that is in the folder, really explains how one school district really uses PBIS in order to ensure that students have equitable access to the curriculum and have equitable access to the supports necessary in order to achieve academically. In fact, the school district that we learned from, Sanger Unified School District in Fresno County, in that one-pager, the one that with counselors, it really does describe how they use PBIS, and they leverage the counseling staff that they use. So in addition to having their traditional academic counselors, Sanger Unified used supplemental funds in order to hire what they call family liaisons, I believe, and they provide students who require Tier 3 supports additional counseling services. For example, these are supplemental. They do not supplant the academic counselor, but they offer additional support, such as reteaching a lesson or additional time for to retake a test. And one of the things that we heard from young people is that these family liaisons, student family liaisons, what they do is that they give them the tools to be able to have the language to speak with their teachers about the types of supports that they need and that they are receiving through these Tier 3 support system. Additionally, what Sanger also did in using supplemental funds is that they hired part-time teachers. These are teachers who are on their staff on a part-time basis, and they provide the Tier 2 supports. And they also reteach lessons, offer additional time, and it was a way that they made PBIS happen and ensuring that students were receiving the supports necessary to be able to achieve in all the academic coursework. And folks can read more about that in the CCR counselor tool. I'm hoping that's helpful.
Great, yes, thank you. Thank you. So we have someone who their context is at an urban area, actually just across the bay there in San Francisco. And this participant writes, when at a high school in an urban area, how does one engage families when most of them are working 2 or more jobs to survive economically? There's little time to even attend a back-to-school night or parent-teacher conference, trainings. How do we begin to engage those kinds of families in those situations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that is something that one Sanger Unified is able to do through these family liaisons, right, where the liaison is able to bridge kind of that gap when families might not be available in traditional times that schools might be available. What else we've seen work is when although it is taxing, when school districts and school sites offer varying times for opportunities to engage with families. We know that it is sometimes difficult to have families engage, for example, only in the morning or only during lunch or only in the evening. So when they provide different times for different families, that's another way that it has been helpful. But also sending communications through in different languages and languages that are accessible to families. Sometimes families might not be able to participate for the meeting times, but they might be able to access the information if it's available to them on a website or if it's been mailed to them. So there are ways that they want to engage authentically. Another thing that we've seen been really successful, and this is actually something that we've been doing here in the Bay Area, and that we have really the privilege of doing at Trust West because we have, for example, I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, but when we started offering community conversations in Spanish, we saw, or the county that we're working with saw an influx of families who weren't previously as involved in their students' academic experiences in the school district participate. So often is extending that olive branch and showing that it is going to be accessible in their home language that brings folks along. And we often hear from families that it's not that they don't want to participate and that they don't want to make the time, but often because folks are not as inviting into their needs, and that includes alternate time, that includes in their home language, then they don't feel like that they are organically and adequately being invited. So often it's those olive branches, and again, using supplemental funds in varying ways, much like Sanger has, can really help engage with families, and thinking about the ways that Monrovia Unified has done it as well in the summer when folks' schedules might be a little bit more open. So there are different tools to think about how to engage families, and oftentimes it's not that, again, they don't want to be engaged or they might not want to take the time off, but often it's because it's not available in their home language, so they don't think they would be able to authentically engage should they take the time off.
That's great. Thank you for helping us to think about, more options and how important it is for a home language. Sometimes can be an obstacle to receiving the right information and connecting a part of the school and the admin that's there. Thank you for that. So next question is, this individual works at a public charter school, and they'd like to know if there are any strategies or tools to get the school board involved in creating and maintaining equitable outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. We meet with school boards regularly. Sometimes is through talking through them about potential resolutions. So I think that sometimes when folks think about school boards, often they think about large policy changes. And those are difficult to come by, right? And one of the things that one of the strategies that we have found to be incredibly helpful is to think about resolutions. And these don't have to be large policy changes, but they can be small steps, and they can start in a specific number of schools to start moving the needle. And to show these with data, I think sometimes school board members might not have access to data as do school site folks or district level folks. And so making data accessible to school boards and presenting them in ways that is relatable to them and that they can really understand it and digest it is really important. And we do have tools at Trust West that can help do that. If you visit our website and you see data or data equity walk tools, that we often hear from folks that is a great way to bring not just school board members along, but also to bring the larger community. When you also have data where the larger community can make sense of it and that they can digest it, you can also leverage the community to go to school board meetings and to talk to their school board members about the types of resolutions that you'd like to see happen. So we definitely think that data is a strong way, and if you can make data digestible, not just to school board members, but also to the community, to leverage the strength of the community, can really help bring school board members along.
Thank you. So kind of a big picture question here. How do we approach a topic like systematic racism that fosters hope rather than discouragement?
So I actually think Myra and the practice team here have done a really great job the last year of piloting some new materials, which I think work really in a very intentional way to do just that.
Yeah, so we have an equity toolkit. And one of the things, and again, you can read more about that in the ETW menu of services tool. And what we do so that it's much more hopeful, and because something like systemic racism and battling that can seem unachievable. And so we start with, or we help folks conduct root cause analysis to really think about a systemic issue and do a root cause analysis of why that is. And that can really get folks down to understanding what has caused this and how it can shift. And one of the reasons why I think that a root cause analysis is particularly helpful is because it helps folks understand the tangible policies and practices that can shift in order to create change. It can be really daunting to think about having to change an entire school district or entire school site. But if you really bring it down to what is the root cause of why the issues exist, then it can be much more manageable to say, okay, we're going to change this one thing, and we are going to start with this one thing and then move to the other. So I think the root cause analysis is really helpful. But I think also it's thinking about the reasons why we're doing this work, right? When we think about students, when we think about families, when we think about their varying needs and their lived realities, it's important that if we center students' experiences, then the work is achievable. And if we see how young people respond to some of the changes that we're making, then it helps move folks along. But with the equity toolkit, we really help groups of people think about, again, starting with the self and then moving to the system. Because if we begin with the self, we can really start to see those small changes and how they manifest in our interactions with young people and with families.
Both of those resources, Dr. Lara, sound like very valuable and helpful. I think it really gets at least two different powerful ways to address some of these issues, the root cause analysis as well as the equity toolkit. Are those available in the folder you have here for us at this bit.ly link, or would that be just on your website?
Those are available in the folder.
Great,
yeah.
Great. Thank you for including those in there. Again, participants can go to bit.ly/school counselor webinar and find all the resources mentioned during this time. Okay, so maybe a more logistic question, but an important one nonetheless. And are there any current recruitment incentives that you're familiar with for recruiting school counselors? We know that there is a shortage of them and the needs are very high, and especially in places where diversity is a major dynamic, it can be tough to recruit. Have you heard of any effective recruitment incentives for school counselors?
You know, we would love to see actually some much more large-scale recruitment incentives for counselors across the state. You know, I think there are incentives that vary from district to district, kind of depending on where a district is and what their needs are. But we have not, you know, right now are not familiar with anything that's really systemic across the whole state. One thing that is promising that we have seen on the teacher preparation side, and we'd love to see more of on the counselor prep side as well, is just really extending pipelines much more further back. So there are some districts across the state that have started working with students as early as middle school to both prime them for pathways that are available in their high schools where they can take dual enrollment classes, which set them up to do teacher prep programs. And one of the things that we're definitely advocating for is to see similar programs for counselors, because a lot of the conversations, at least that we're in across the state, you know, there's a lot of focus on the teacher shortage, we feel like, but less focus on the shortage that we also have of counselors, which we feel like is also very significant and important. And are continuing to advocate there as well for more resources and extending pipelines. But I'm also really, if folks know of places that are moving that work and trying to change those shortages, we would love to hear about them as well, so we can be sharing them across the state.
That is great. And then what I'm hearing is really your website, and maybe even signing up for some things there would be a great way to stay informed of other innovative programs or best practices that you found in districts across the state. Would that be a recommendation?
It would be. And actually, the other thing that you can find on, once you go to our site, our national office has also looked at this, so they may have examples from other states where they are having much more systematic efforts to move the needle around this question as well.
That's great. Very good. So one last question before we kind of end our time this morning, and that is, how do we get buy-in from parents and students who don't prioritize academics and school-related involvement?
Yeah, to be quite frank, in the equity audits that we do and in the work that we do statewide, when we have the opportunity to speak with students through focus groups and with families and focus groups, we often hear, and the common theme is that statement that they don't prioritize academics is a false one. They are, in fact, academia and academic success is, in fact, a priority for a lot of students and for families. What often happens is that schools are not set up to tap into the ways in which they might be prioritizing school and academics, right? One of the things that we hear often is that the curriculum often lacks culturally responsive and culturally sustaining pedagogies. And so it might seem that young people are not prioritizing and are not engaged, but in fact, what is happening is that the pedagogies that are in practice are not speaking to young people and are not speaking to families in the ways in which that they learn and are interested in academia. So one of the things that we do advocate for is formal professional learning opportunities to ensure that culturally relevant and culturally sustaining pedagogies are in place, and that these are ongoing, that these don't just happen once, but that they are recurring in order for teachers and counselors and all really folks who are part of the school's ecosystem are really responsive to students and families' needs. So I think that's definitely an approach, and I think also that you can leverage career technical education pathways and create those that are responsive to what students and families are asking for. So surveying students and families to learn more about the career technical education pathways that they are interested in, so that it does provide an opportunity for students to be engaged in school in ways that they would like to be engaged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was just told, I agree with everything that Myra just laid out, and would just add that in the work I was doing before at Trust West with colleges and high schools across California, we saw powerful change when learning was really contextualized, and within some of the pathways, students had access to internships and other opportunities to learn about the careers associated with, it made the algebra that they were learning so much more important when it was contextualized within the larger frame of how that fit within their larger career dreams and goals. And so it's just a really powerful, we've seen it here at Trust West too, just a powerful lever that contextualizing learning can be for students and parents and families.
Wonderful. Thank you both, and we're especially grateful for your time, Dr. Lara and Dr. Smith-Arriaga. The work that you are doing is important, and this past hour as a focus on equipping and empowering school counselors and support staff. Thank you for that. There's a few attendees that had mentioned, I think, during the Q&A time that the equity toolkit, they weren't able to find it there in the Bitly folder. If you could maybe double check that, that'd be great. It seems there's a big interest for that. I think it sounds like it'd be really helpful. So I don't know if maybe he didn't get a chance to make it in there or something, but that'd be great if it could be.
Yeah, I should clarify that the whole toolkit itself is not in the folder, but a description is on the second page in the menu of services. And folks can definitely feel free to email me directly should they want to speak more about the equity toolkit and how to access some of the resources there.
Great, great. So a recording of this entire time will be put up on our YouTube channel later this month. So all those that registered will be able to attend if those had to leave us early. Just by way of thank you and by way of saying hope to see you again, I want to announce the California Student Mental Wellness Conference for 2020 will be held on March 23rd and 24th in Anaheim. There you can go and register at wellnesstogether.org/conference and find out all the information, keynote speakers, schedule, everything. We hope to see you there. Thank you again for your time. For those that are still with us, on behalf of Wellness Together School Mental Health, the Education Trust West, and the California Department of Education, thank you. And the work you're doing matters, and we hope you've found this time beneficial. Dr. Lada, Dr. Smith-Arriaga, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone have a great week.